The Interstellar Combat Theory Institute occupied a space station that hung in the void like a pretentious chandelier, all gleaming metal and unnecessary architectural flourishes. Somebody had decided that higher education needed to look intimidating. And by the stars, they had succeeded. The station housed approximately 12,000 students from across 73 different species, all convinced they were the apex of their respective evolutionary trees. Most of them were wrong, but nobody had bothered to tell them yet. The ICTI, as it was called by people too busy to pronounce all those syllables, specialized in teaching warfare theory to the children of politicians, military officers, and the obscenely wealthy. It was the kind of institution where you learned to command fleets before you learned humility, where tactical genius was praised but common sense was apparently optional. The curriculum covered everything from siege warfare to space combat, from hand-to-hand techniques to strategic planetary invasion. All theoretical, of course. The Institute prided itself on producing thinkers, not fighters, which was a polite way of saying most of these students could not punch their way out of a paper bag if their lives depended on it. The station operated on a galactic standard schedule that satisfied absolutely nobody. The Metherians complained it did not align with their 17-hour circadian rhythm. The Vex complained about everything on principle. The humans just drank more coffee and pretended they were fine. They were not fine. Nobody was fine, but this was education, and suffering built character, or something equally philosophical. Today's particular venue of learning was Advanced Combat Simulation Theory, a class that somehow managed to be both incredibly dangerous and mind-numbingly boring. The classroom itself was a circular amphitheater with seats arranged in concentric rings around a central arena floor. The arena could project holographic scenarios, simulate various planetary conditions, and allegedly even replicate the exact atmospheric composition of any registered world. Whether it actually did this or just made things smell weird was up for debate. Professor Kilrathnon, a Vexian with too many arms and not enough patience, stood at the instructor's podium reviewing his notes. Vexians resembled what would happen if an octopus decided to go to the gym and then got really into personal grooming. 6 arms, chromatophore skin that shifted colors based on mood, and an unfortunate tendency toward condescension. Kilrathnon was currently a mottled purple, which meant he was already irritated and class had not even started yet. The students filtered in with the enthusiasm of people attending their own funeral. There were Kralix warriors, naturally, because where else would they be? The Kralix were 7-foot-tall reptilian humanoids who had built their entire culture around being terrifying. Scales like armor plating, claws that could rend steel, and egos that could not fit through standard doorways. They wore their arrogance like a second skin, which was impressive considering their first skin was already pretty impressive. A cluster of Metherian students occupied the upper left section, their insectoid bodies clicking and chittering as they communicated in their ultrasonic language. Metherians were the intellectuals of the galaxy, at least according to Metherians. 4 arms, compound eyes, and an insufferable habit of explaining things nobody asked about. The Yulnari delegates sat together in their environmental suits, their gaseous forms swirling inside the containment fields. They had not figured out how to look intimidating yet, but they were working on it. Mostly they just looked like angry clouds, which was probably intentional. And then there were the humans. 3 of them in a class of 45. A statistical anomaly and a political statement all wrapped into one. Humans had only joined the galactic community 70 years ago, which in galactic terms was approximately 5 minutes ago. Most species still viewed them as the new neighbors who had not learned the rules yet. Amusing in small doses, potentially dangerous in large ones, and absolutely not to be taken seriously in academic or military contexts. The first human student was Marcus Webb. a broad-shouldered young man who spent most of class looking mildly confused but determined. He sat in the middle section, taking notes on a datapad and occasionally frowning at things he did not understand, which was most things. The second was Dmitry Volkov, tall and lanky, who had mastered the art of looking attentive while thinking about lunch. He occupied a seat near the back, his legs stretched out in a posture that suggested he might start napping at any moment. The third human sat alone in the lower right section, and nobody knew quite what to make of her. She was neither tall nor short, neither bulky nor slight. Brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark eyes that tracked everything but engaged with nothing, and a resting expression that could generously be called unimpressed. She dressed in the standard institute jumpsuit like everyone else, but somehow managed to make it look less like a uniform and more like something she wore because regulations required it, not because she cared. Her name was on the roster naturally, but the narration was not going to use it. Call it artistic choice. Call it maintaining mystery. Call it whatever helped you sleep at night. The point was, she existed in a state of deliberate anonymity, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd of 3. The other students had stopped trying to befriend her after the first week. She answered questions in monosyllables, participated in group projects with mechanical efficiency, and otherwise gave the impression of someone tolerating an inconvenience. The general consensus was that she was either incredibly shy or incredibly boring. The general consensus was, as general consensuses often are, completely wrong. Professor Kilrathnon's skin shifted to an authoritative blue as he called the class to order. 6 arms gestured simultaneously, which was excessive but effective. Today, we examine theoretical applications of close-quarters combat in multi-species engagement scenarios, he announced, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who had given this lecture 16 times and was tired of it. You will note that physical confrontation represents the final failure of strategic thinking. Only primitives resort to personal combat when tactical options remain available. Several Kralik students shifted in their seats. Their species worshipped combat prowess, and hearing it described as primitive failure did not sit well. But they kept quiet, mostly because Kilrathnon had tenure and a reputation for failing students who annoyed him. However, the professor continued, understanding physical combat theory remains essential. You must know your enemy's capabilities, limitations, and psychological weaknesses. This knowledge informs strategy at every level. He tapped a control, and the central arena flickered to life with holographic displays. Diagrams of various species' anatomies rotated slowly, highlighting vulnerable points and natural weapons. It was educational and vaguely disturbing, like a medical textbook written by someone who enjoyed their work too much. Consider the Kralik's physiology. Kilrathnon gestured at a rotating hologram. Superior strength, natural weapons, redundant organ systems. In theoretical close combat, they possess considerable advantages against most species. Vexthor straightened in his seat, his scales catching the light. Here was a Kralix who had taken the species' reputation and internalized it to an unhealthy degree. He was massive, even by Kralik standards, with scarlet scales that marked him as high-caste military lineage. His family had produced generals for 7 generations. He wore this heritage like armor, and he made sure everyone knew it. However, the professor continued, apparently unaware he was inflating egos, advantages create complacency. The theoretically superior fighter often underestimates opponents, leading to tactical errors and strategic defeat. Vexithor snorted, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. Several students glanced his way. He had a pattern of making his opinions known, whether anyone requested them or not. Consider the human physiology. Kilrathnon pulled up a new hologram, and suddenly the human students became very interested in their datapads. The rotating diagram highlighted a bipedal form that looked embarrassingly fragile compared to the previous displays. Minimal natural weapons, average strength relative to body mass. No armor plating, no redundant systems, no environmental adaptations worth noting. By conventional metrics, humans rank in the lower quartile for combat capability. Marcus Webb's jaw tightened. Dmitri examined his fingernails with sudden intensity. The unnamed female student's expression did not change at all, which was somehow more unnerving than anger would have been. Yet humans possess unusual psychological characteristics, the professor continued. Persistence, hunting instincts, disproportionate aggression responses, an unfortunate tendency to attack problems directly rather than strategically. These factors create unpredictability in theoretical models. Unpredictable failure, Vexthor interjected, his voice carrying across the amphitheater. Professor, with respect, calling humans unpredictable is generous. They are simply reckless. Desperation tactics from a species that evolved without proper advantages. A few students laughed. Most looked uncomfortable. The Metharians clicked disapprovingly, but Metharians always clicked disapprovingly about something. Kilrathnon's skin flickered orange, the Vexian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. You have combat experience to support this assessment, Vexthor? Theoretical analysis, Professor. Humans have been in the galactic community for 70 years. Their military record consists of border skirmishes and peacekeeping operations. No major engagements, no significant victories. They are security guards, not warriors. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something but could not figure out what. Dmitri had stopped pretending to pay attention and was now genuinely paying attention, waiting to see how this developed. The female human continued taking notes as if nobody had spoken. An interesting perspective, Kilrathnon said neutrally. Does anyone wish to challenge this assessment? Silence. The kind of heavy silence that meant everyone was thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it. Challenging Vexthor academically meant making an enemy socially. He had connections, influence, and the kind of vindictive streak that made people's academic careers mysteriously difficult. Then we will proceed with the simulation exercise, the professor continued. I need 2 volunteers for a theoretical close-quarters engagement demonstration. Vexthor stood immediately. Of course he did. Subtlety was not a Krallick's virtue. I volunteer, Professor. Very well. I need an opponent for the scenario. Nobody moved. The smart play was staying seated and invisible. Getting in the arena with Vexthor meant humiliation at best, injury at worst. The simulation systems had safety protocols, but accidents happened, frequently around Vexthor. Strange how that worked. Come now, Kilrathnon gestured impatiently. This is a learning environment. Someone volunteer before I start drafting people. More silence. Students suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Vexthor's laugh echoed through the amphitheater, harsh and mocking. Perhaps the humans would volunteer. Show us these unpredictable tactics the professor mentioned. Marcus went rigid. Dmitri stopped breathing. Every eye in the room turned toward the 3 human students. After all, Vexthor continued, warming to his theme like a bully who had found an audience. Humans are supposed to be these great survivors, yes? These clever little persistence hunters? Surely one of you could provide adequate demonstration. He was not looking at Marcus or Dmitri. His yellow eyes fixed on the female student in the lower right section, the one who had not reacted to anything he said. That lack of reaction annoyed him. Vex Thor was accustomed to inspiring fear or respect, preferably both. Indifference was insulting. You. He pointed directly at her. The quiet one. You have been in this class for 3 months and said perhaps 20 words total. Let us see if humans fight better than they speak. Professor Kilrathnon's skin went gray, which meant this had gone off script, and he was not happy about it. Vex Thor. Volunteer selection is not... I volunteer, the human said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and completely devoid of emotion. She closed her datapad, stood, and began walking toward the arena floor. Every movement was economical, purposeful, like she had done this 1,000 times and found it mildly tedious. The amphitheater erupted in murmurs. The Metharians clicked frantically, their version of shocked gossip. A few Kralik students laughed outright. The Yulnari swirled in their containment suits, which probably meant something in their gaseous body language, but looked like fancy lava lamps. Marcus half rose from his seat. Don't. She waved him off without looking back. Descending the steps to the arena floor, Vex Thor watched her approach with the expression of someone who had won an argument before it started. He rolled his massive shoulders, scales scraping against each other with a sound like swords being sharpened. Professor, Vex Thor called up to the podium. Standard combat simulation protocols? Kilrathnon looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. Yes. Standard protocols. Safety limiters engaged. First incapacitation or submission ends the match. He focused on the human. Student, you understand you may withdraw at any time? I understand, she replied, stepping onto the arena floor. The simulation field hummed to life, creating a transparent barrier around the combat zone. Environmental controls adjusted, gravity normalized, and holographic markers appeared defining the engagement area. Approximately 30 feet in diameter. Nowhere to run, even if she wanted to, which she clearly did not. Vex Thor cracked his knuckles, each pop loud enough to echo. I will try not to hurt you too badly, human. Consider this educational. She said nothing, just stood there, arms loose at her sides, weight balanced, watching him with those dark, unimpressed eyes. Safety protocols active, Kilrathnon announced with resignation. Combatants ready. Begin. Vex Thor did not rush. He was a bully, not an idiot. He circled slowly, letting her see his size advantage, his natural weapons, the scales that would turn any punch she threw. Psychological warfare before the physical kind. Let the fear build. Let her realize she had made a terrible mistake. The human turned slowly, keeping him in front of her, maintaining distance. Her hands stayed loose. No fighting stance, no preparation, just tracking his movement like a camera recording data. You know, Vex Thor said conversationally, my clutch brother fought humans once. Border dispute 7 years ago. He said they scream entertainingly. No response. She just kept watching, waiting. He said they break easily too. Fragile bones, soft flesh, like crushing fruit. Still nothing. The lack of reaction was starting to genuinely irritate him. Vex Thor liked fear. He fed on it, used it, weaponized it. This emotionless observation was wrong. Prey was supposed to look scared. He attacked. For something his size, Vex Thor moved with shocking speed. Combat training and natural ability combining into a forward rush that had ended dozens of sparring matches. His clawed hand swept in a wide arc, not trying to injure through the safety field, but to overwhelm, to grab, to establish dominance. The human was not there. She had shifted left, minimal movement, just enough to make his grab miss by inches. Vex Thor's momentum carried him forward 2 steps before he could arrest his movement and turn. She had not moved from her new position. Still watching, still waiting. The amphitheater had gone dead silent. Vex Thor's scales flushed darker red, a biological response to anger and adrenaline. Lucky dodge, human. He feinted high and swept low, a combination that worked on overconfident opponents who thought they could read his attacks. The human stepped back precisely far enough that his leg sweep missed by millimeters, then advanced into the space his recovery created. For the first time, she struck. Not a wild swing or desperate attack. A precise jab to his solar plexus, exactly where the scales provided less protection, exactly where Krellick's anatomy placed a nerve cluster. The safety field absorbed the impact, but the intent was crystal clear. Vex Thor actually stumbled backward, more from surprise than force. She had hit him. This small, weak, ridiculous human had actually landed a strike. The students were on their feet now, pressing against the amphitheater railings. Marcus was shouting something. Professor Kilrathnon had abandoned his podium to get a better view, his skin cycling through colors so fast he looked like a disco ball. "Interesting," the human said quietly, her first word since entering the arena. Vex Thor roared, and this time there was no strategy, no technique, just fury. He came at her with everything, claws and strength and size, a combination assault that should have ended any normal opponent in seconds. Should have. The human moved like water, like smoke, like something that existed in the spaces between attacks. She ducked under a claw swipe, pivoted around a grab attempt, stepped inside his guard, and delivered 3 quick strikes to his ribs. The safety field turned each hit into pressure rather than damage, but everyone watching could see the precision. She was not hitting randomly. She was targeting specific points with surgical accuracy. Vex Thor spun, trying to use his tail as a weapon. The human vaulted over it, landed, and immediately attacked his knee joint with a low kick that made him buckle. Not fall, the safety protocols prevented actual joint destruction, but buckle. His balance disrupted, his legendary Krellick stability compromised. "How?" he started to say, but she was already moving. What followed was not a fight. It was a systematic demonstration of the difference between brawling and actual combat expertise. Every attack Vex Thor launched, she had an answer for. Every technique he employed, she countered with something more efficient. She was not faster, not stronger, not more durable. She was simply better. She used his strength against him, redirecting momentum rather than opposing it. She exploited gaps in his defense that he did not know existed. When he tried to grab her, she turned the attempt into a throw that sent him stumbling. When he tried to strike, she was already somewhere else, and something important hurt. The Krellick's warrior, the proud descendant of 7 generations of generals, was being taken apart by someone a third his size. And the worst part, the truly humiliating part that would haunt him for years, was that she was not even breathing hard. Vex Thor crashed to his knees after a combination he did not see coming and could not have stopped if he had. The human had swept his legs, controlled his fall, and placed him in a submission hold that was simultaneously gentle and absolutely inescapable. One arm locked, his neck positioned so any movement would trigger the safety field's automatic shutdown. "Submit," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying beyond the arena. Vex Thor struggled. Pride would not let him quit. His scales flushed through a dozen colors, rage and humiliation mixing into something toxic. "Submit," she repeated, applying fractional pressure. "Or I will continue, and you will still submit, but with less dignity." The arena, the amphitheater, possibly the entire station, held its breath. "I submit," Vex Thor choked out, the words like broken glass in his throat. The safety field chimed and powered down. The human released him immediately, stood, and walked back to her starting position without a backward glance. Vex Thor remained on his knees, staring at the floor, his world comprehensively shattered. Professor Kilrathnon's skin had settled on a stunned silver. "Match concluded," he managed to say. "Winner by submission." The amphitheater exploded, students shouting, demanding explanations, placing retroactive bets they swore they had made before the match. The Metharians were clicking so frantically, they sounded like malfunctioning machinery. Several Yulnari had apparently become so agitated, their containment suits were fogging up. Marcus and Dmitri looked like someone had just explained a magic trick and made it less comprehensible. They knew their fellow human student was quiet. But this was something else entirely. The unnamed human walked calmly back to her seat, collected her datapad, and sat down. Her expression had not changed. She might have just finished a mild workout rather than systematically dismantling the class bully in front of 45 witnesses. Vex Thor eventually stood, his movements mechanical, and left the arena. He did not return to his seat. He walked straight out of the classroom, and if his scales were glistening suspiciously, well, everyone had the decency to pretend they did not notice. Professor Kilrathnon cleared his throat multiple times before the class settled enough for him to speak. "That was," he began, stopped, reconsidered, "educational." His skin flickered through several colors before settling on contemplative blue. Multiple lessons were demonstrated. First, physical advantages mean nothing without technical skill. Second, underestimating opponents based on species prejudice leads to strategic failure. Third, he looked directly at the human student. Some individuals possess capabilities that transcend typical species parameters. She was taking notes again, like he was lecturing about agricultural irrigation systems. Perhaps, one of the Metharian students clicked, her translator rendering it into galactic standard. "We should know the human's background?" This was not typical performance. Kilrathnon hesitated, then gestured to his datapad, accessing the student files. His skin went pale purple, the Vexian equivalent of raised eyebrows. "The student's file indicates," he said slowly, "prior military service. Human military, Special Operations Command, Combat Instructor Certification. 3 years deployed in hostile engagement zones before attending the Institute." The amphitheater went silent again, but this time it was the silence of comprehension dawning and embarrassment settling in. "She is here," the professor continued, "on a military scholarship to study strategic theory. Her entrance examination scores placed her in the 97th percentile for tactical analysis." Marcus turned in his seat to stare at his fellow human. She did not look up from her notes. "So, when Vex Thor called her unpredictable," Dmitri said slowly, "she was actually extremely predictable to anyone who bothered checking her qualifications," Kilrathnon finished. "Yes." Several students suddenly became very interested in their datapads, frantically pulling up the class roster and student files they should have reviewed 3 months ago. The information had been available the entire time. They simply had not cared enough to look. The human student raised her hand, which was so unusual that several people gasped. "Yes?" the professor said cautiously. "May I be dismissed? I have another class in 20 minutes. Kilrathnon's skin flickered with what might have been amusement. "Dismissed. The rest of you, remain seated. We have much to discuss about assumptions, intelligence gathering, and why reading your opponent's background should precede engagement." The human stood, gathered her materials, and walked toward the exit. Every eye tracked her movement. As she reached the door, Marcus called out, "Hey, wait!" She paused, turned slightly. "That was incredible," he said. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" She considered the question for a moment, her expression unchanging. "Practice," she said simply, and left. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. The class sat in stunned silence for approximately 5 seconds before erupting into excited conversation. Theories were exchanged, replays were demanded, and several students were frantically messaging friends in other classes about what they had just witnessed. Professor Kilrathnon let them chatter for a moment before calling order. His skin had settled into an amused green. "Let this be your lesson," he announced. "In warfare, in strategy, in any form of conflict, your enemy is not what you assume they are. They are what they demonstrate themselves to be. Species stereotypes, cultural biases, comfortable prejudices, these are weaknesses in your tactical analysis." He pulled up the holographic display again, showing the recording of the match. "Watch this again. Study it. The human student demonstrated textbook defensive counterfighting. She wasted no movement, employed superior technique over superior strength, and maintained emotional control throughout. These are not species traits. These are professional military traits." The replay showed the human dodging, striking, controlling space and momentum. What had looked like supernatural ability in real time now revealed itself as simply excellent training meeting inadequate opposition. "Vexthor made 3 critical errors," Kilrathnon continued. "First, he assumed species characteristics defined individual capability. Second, he initiated conflict without reconnaissance. Third, he let pride override tactical assessment. These mistakes cost him a sparring match. In real combat, they cost lives." A Kralik student in the back, one of Vexthor's usual companions, raised a claw tentatively. "Professor, was the human holding back?" Kilrathanon's skin went dark blue, serious and contemplative. "Yes," he said simply. Safety protocols limited her options significantly. "In unrestricted combat." He paused. "I suspect the match would have concluded much faster and far less pleasantly for Vexthor." That statement settled over the class like cold water. The demonstration they had witnessed, impressive as it was, had been the restrained version. The human had been pulling her punches, literally and figuratively, and had still dominated, completely. "Humans," one of the Metherians clicked thoughtfully, "may require recategorization in combat capability assessments." "One human," Kilrathnon corrected, "demonstrated superior capability. Do not make the opposite error of assuming all humans possess such training." That said, he gestured to where Marcus and Dmitri sat. "I recommend actually speaking with your human classmates. You might learn something useful." The 2 human students suddenly found themselves the center of attention, which neither seemed particularly comfortable with. Marcus managed an awkward wave. Dmitri gave a thumbs up, which translated poorly across species, but seemed friendly enough. Class continued, though nobody was really paying attention. The theoretical lecture on force multiplication and tactical advantage kept getting derailed by students asking questions about human combat doctrine, military training, and whether humans really ate food that could kill them for entertainment. Marcus confirmed the last one, which somehow impressed people more than the combat demonstration. By the time class ended, a fundamental shift had occurred. The human students were no longer curiosities or statistical anomalies. They were unknowns, which in military theory was far more dangerous. Unknown variables had to be accounted for, studied, understood. As students filed out, several approached Marcus and Dmitri with questions, invitations to study groups, offers of camaraderie. The 2 humans handled it with good nature, though both kept glancing at the door their silent compatriot had exited through. In the hallway outside, Vexthor leaned against the wall, his scales still flushed with humiliation. He had not left entirely, just retreated far enough to avoid immediate contact. Pride was a complicated thing. It made you do stupid things, and then prevented you from escaping the consequences. The human student walked past without acknowledging him, heading toward her next class with the same economical stride. "Wait," Vexthor managed, the words scraping out. She stopped, turned, waited. "You could have hurt me," he said slowly, working through the realization. "The safety protocols prevented it, but you knew points of attack that would have caused permanent damage." "Yes," she agreed simply. "You chose not to. The objective was to end the conflict, not create an injury requiring medical intervention. Mission accomplished." She spoke like she was filing a report, clinical and detached. Vexthor realized he had not actually angered her. He had not frightened her, impressed her, or provoked any emotional response whatsoever. He had been an obstacle, and she had removed the obstacle, and that was the entirety of her investment in the situation. Somehow, that was worse than if she had hated him. "I underestimated you," Vexthor said, which was the closest thing to an apology his pride would allow. "Most people do," she replied. "It provides tactical advantage." "Is that why you stay quiet? To be underestimated?" She considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I stay quiet because I have nothing to say to most people here. You are students playing at war. I have seen war. The conversations do not intersect." With that, she turned and continued down the hallway, leaving Vexthor with the uncomfortable realization that she had not just beaten him physically. She had dismissed him as irrelevant, which was somehow the greater defeat. News of the incident spread through the institute faster than recycled air through ventilation systems. By evening, everyone knew about the human who had demolished a Kralix warrior without apparent effort. By the next morning, several versions of the story were circulating, each more elaborate than the last. In one version, she had broken 17 bones. In another, she had moved so fast the cameras could not track her. In a particularly creative iteration, she had apparently fought blindfolded while reciting poetry. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment. But truth rarely satisfied the rumor mill. The human student noticed the attention the way someone notices weather, aware of it, unconcerned by it, moving through it without adjustment. She attended classes, completed assignments, and maintained her pattern of functional silence. But things had changed in subtle ways. Students no longer dismissed human opinions in group discussions. Professors called on Marcus and Dmitri more often, actually listening to their perspectives. The cafeteria seating arrangements shifted, with more species mixing rather than segregating by comfort zones. One incident, one match, one demonstration that you should not judge capability by appearance or species had rippled outward in ways both predictable and strange. 3 weeks later, advanced combat simulation theory met again. Vexthor attended, though he sat in a different section now, away from his usual companions. His scales had returned to normal color, but something in his posture had changed. Less arrogance, more caution, pride tempered by painful education. Professor Kilrathnon began class with a new topic: asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics. His skin was an enthusiastic yellow as he pulled up case studies from various conflicts. "Today, we examine situations where conventionally inferior forces achieved victory through superior strategy and technique," he announced. "We will analyze 17 engagements spanning 4 centuries and 32 species conflicts." One of the case studies involved human military actions during their integration period. Border conflicts with species that had assumed humanity would be easily intimidated or controlled. The outcomes had surprised several civilizations quite badly. Note the pattern. Kilrathnon highlighted sections of the analysis. Human forces consistently employed tactics their opponents considered irrational or impossible. Persistence attacks that should have been abandoned. Defensive positions held beyond logical breaking points. Counter-offensives launched from positions of disadvantage. Marcus listened with growing recognition. These were not alien concepts to him. These were stories his grandfather told, his aunt mentioned, his culture celebrated. Humans had a word for it. Stubbornness. The galaxy apparently called it tactical unpredictability. The common factor, the professor continued, is that human military doctrine does not prioritize individual survival the way most species doctrines do. They emphasize mission completion and unit cohesion, even at significant personal cost. This creates decision-making patterns that conventional tactical analysis struggles to predict. The unnamed human student raised her hand again, which was still unusual enough that the class fell silent. Yes? Kilrathnon acknowledged her. Professor, with respect, that analysis is incomplete. Several students inhaled sharply. Contradicting professors was not standard protocol. Kilrathnon's skin flickered through several colors before settling on curious purple. Explain, he said. She stood, which was apparently what she did when making formal statements. Human military doctrine prioritizes adaptability over doctrine. The tactics you mentioned worked not because humans are suicidal or irrational, but because human forces were trained to assess situations independently and act accordingly. If persistence works, persist. If retreat preserves force strength for later engagement, retreat. The unpredictability comes from decentralized decision-making, not cultural death wishes. The class absorbed this. It made uncomfortable sense. Unpredictability was not chaos. It was flexibility that looked like chaos to rigid tactical systems. Furthermore, she continued, describing human tactics as unconventional only makes sense from a non-human perspective. To humans, they are conventional. Every species fights according to their evolutionary advantages. You consider Krallick's strength conventional because Krallicks are strong. You consider Metherian coordination conventional because Metherians coordinate naturally. Human adaptability is our conventional tactic. Kilrathnon's skin had gone through an entire spectrum and settled on impressed gold. An excellent clarification, he said. This exemplifies why assuming your logic is universal logic creates strategic blindness. The human sat back down. Vexthor was looking at her with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been deeper understanding of how badly he had miscalculated that day in the arena. Class continued with renewed energy. Students asked questions, debated interpretations, and generally engaged with the material in ways they had not before. One incident had cracked something open, made the theoretical suddenly practical and immediate. At the end of class, as students filed out, Professor Kilrathnon called out to the human student. She approached the podium, waiting. I wanted to ask, he said carefully, why you volunteered that day. You knew it would draw attention. You clearly prefer avoiding attention. She considered the question with her usual thorough approach. Vexthor needed to learn that lesson, she said finally. Better to learn it in a safe environment than in actual combat where the cost would be measured in lives rather than pride. You were trying to help him? I was trying to help everyone in that classroom, Professor. Arrogance kills. Not immediately, not obviously, but eventually. If my demonstration prevented even one person from making a fatal assumption in real combat someday, then the attention was worth enduring. Kilrathnon studied her for a long moment. You know, he said, I have been teaching for 37 years. I thought I understood humans reasonably well. Your species is making me reconsider many assumptions. Good, she said simply. Assumptions are dangerous. She turned to leave, but the professor stopped her. One more question. Why are you here? With your background, you could be commanding units, training special forces, doing field work. Why study theory at an academic institution? The human's expression shifted slightly, the first hint of something beyond neutral observation. Because wars end, Professor. Combat skills atrophy in peace, but strategic thinking serves forever. I am learning to think at scales beyond individual engagement. When the next conflict comes, and it will, I will be ready to operate at levels that matter. She left, and Kilrathnon stood alone in the empty amphitheater, his skin cycling through thoughtful colors. 3 months of having that student in his class, and he had not truly seen her until she chose to be visible. The semester continued. The incident did not fade, but transformed into institutional legend. Future classes heard about it. Professors referenced it. Security footage somehow leaked and spread across student networks despite being officially restricted. The human student remained unchanged by the attention, though the attention itself evolved. No longer dismissive, no longer underestimating, but wary. A dangerous thing had been identified and categorized. The students were learning their lessons, just perhaps not the exact lessons the curriculum intended. On the final day of the semester, advanced combat simulation theory concluded with practical examinations. Each student faced scenarios designed to test their theoretical knowledge under pressure. Most performed adequately. Some excelled. A few panicked and failed spectacularly. When the unnamed human student's turn came, Kilrathnon presented her with a scenario specifically designed to be unsolvable. Overwhelming enemy forces, inadequate resources, impossible terrain, and a mission objective that required holding position until reinforcements arrived in 48 hours. She studied the scenario parameters for 30 seconds of silence. This scenario cannot be won, she said finally. Correct. Kilrathnon agreed. But it can be survived. How do you proceed? I do not, she replied. I am one soldier with inadequate resources facing overwhelming force. I cannot hold this position for 48 hours. Therefore, I abandon the mission objective. Several students gasped. Abandoning mission objectives was automatic failure in most military contexts. You would retreat? The professor asked. No. I would recognize that the mission parameters are based on faulty intelligence or impossible expectations. I would conduct strategic retreat, preserve my force strength, and report that the situation requires reassessment. Dying to defend a position that will fall regardless serves no tactical purpose. She looked directly at Kilrathnon. You designed this scenario to test whether I would choose hopeless combat over survival. But that is a false choice. The real test is recognizing when mission parameters must be challenged rather than followed. The professor's skin went brilliant gold. Correct, he said quietly. You are the first student in 5 years to refuse the scenario rather than attempt the impossible. He marked something on his datapad. Perfect score. Class dismissed. As the students filed out for the last time that semester, conversations buzzed with energy. Finals were over. Freedom beckoned. Summer assignments loomed in the distant future, too far to worry about. Marcus caught up with the human student in the hallway. Hey, he said, a bunch of us are getting together tonight. Celebration thing. You should come. She looked at him with those dark, analytical eyes. Why? Because you are classmates? Because we survived the semester? Because you are honestly kind of terrifying and I want to stay on your good side? The corner of her mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. It might have been a muscle spasm. Hard to tell. I will consider it, she said, which was the closest thing to acceptance Marcus was likely to get. She walked away down the corridor, her stride unchanged, her presence somehow larger than her physical form. Behind her, the Institute continued its operations, training the next generation of tactical thinkers and strategic commanders. But something had shifted, subtle as orbital drift, but just as inevitable. The humans were no longer novelties. They were variables, unknown quantities that required actual assessment rather than casual dismissal. In his quarters, Vex Thor reviewed footage of their match for the 100th time, studying each movement, analyzing each decision. His pride had recovered, transmuted into something more useful. He would not underestimate opponents again. He would not assume advantages guaranteed victory. He had learned his lesson. It had cost him humiliation, but lessons purchased with pride rather than blood were bargains. The Interstellar Combat Theory Institute hung in the void, gleaming and pretentious, training the privileged, children of powerful families. Most would graduate and become adequate officers, bureaucrats, and advisors. Some would remember that day in advanced combat simulation theory, when assumptions shattered against reality. And one quiet human would continue studying, preparing, thinking at scales that transcended individual combat. When the next conflict came, she would be ready. The galaxy would do well to remember that unpredictability and weakness were not synonyms, that small and dangerous often overlapped, that the quiet ones were sometimes quiet because they had nothing to prove. Vex Thor had picked a fight that day. He thought he was testing a weak opponent. He had actually been educated by a professional. The galaxy was still learning that distinction. Slowly, painfully, one humiliating lesson at a time.